Oh, okay. Yeah. Take it away, Caleb.
Cool. So yeah, hi guys, my name's Caleb. I run a coffee subscription called Yonder Coffee, and I'm excited to, yeah, have a nice coffee time with you guys today. Um, so I figured I'd start by kind of sharing my background and how I got into coffee, and then like some of the projects I've done in the coffee industry, and then we'll kind of get into more of the journey that every coffee takes on its way to you. So. Um, I'm from North Carolina, and I studied film and graphic design in school at NC State. And then after graduating, began working for a number of nonprofits around the world, kind of doing storytelling about the work that they were doing. And so as I traveled, it was a lot of times like telling like pretty hard stories, like uh, kids rescued from child soldier trafficking and that kind of stuff. And so um, the intensity of the work that I was doing, I kind of fell in love with coffee, and especially like coffee shops as a place to get away and kind of reset and be removed from the intensity of everything. And so I think kind of like everybody in the industry, at some point you have like an experience where something changes. And I think at first I was going to the coffee shop for the, for the good vibes and the kind of like chill atmosphere, and then started to recognize like, wait, it's weird that they can taste like so vastly different and can look really similar, and then sometimes be like really, really good and sometimes be like undrinkable. And so I think I, I kind of enjoyed coffee culture, but without really understanding it. And then kind of fell down the rabbit hole of trying to understand like what's the science that makes this like an extraordinary drink or just like an okay drink. And so yeah, as I guess for me, coffee was always a global experience because the places where I fell in love with it were always in different cities around the world. um, but as I, came and went, left home and came back, a couple of my friends were getting into the coffee industry here in the States. And so a good friend of mine from college is named Marcos Iglesias. He works at Parlor Coffee in Brooklyn now. But at the time he was running a cafe in the North Carolina area. Um, and we just started, I think, learning and experiencing and experimenting with coffee together. And that was sort of my like entryway. So as I kept traveling, uh, I wanted to find a way to help people avoid a lot of the pitfalls that I'd experienced. And so I started a website called A Traveler's Guide to Quality Coffee Around the World, which was basically just a database of good roasters, cafes, coffee carts in different cities all across the world. Because I was spending most of my time and money at those places, and was always like pretty bummed if I'd, taken an Uber 30 minutes away from where I was staying only to find out it had closed or everything had changed and it wasn't good anymore. And so, yeah, I started this database, kind of built an audience there. And then one summer I was visiting Paris, and I was at a roaster there called Cafés du Belleville. And I was writing an article about them. And as we talked about like what growth patterns they were experiencing and what limitations they had, they kind of joked like, you should just start selling our coffee in the US. Um, and I laughed thinking it was a joke. And they're like, actually, we're not joking. We've had a really hard time breaking into the US market because shipping costs are pretty high. But we'd really love to get there. A lot of people that love us are there. And so you should just consider, starting a subscription service. I didn't think that was ever something I could do because at the time I was traveling full time. But a couple months later started to realize like, the worst thing I could do is fail, right? So like we should at least give it a shot. And so Yonder became that subscription service. So I guess growing up in the South, Yonder is anything that's like not from around here. It's if it's not from here, it's from over yonder. Um, and so I wanted to try to find a way to interject some internationality into something that a lot of people think is a really local idea. And so that's really, we'll get more into that later, but I think a lot of times people think of like coffee as like supporting the local coffee shop, and that is a great idea, but there's also no way around the fact that coffee comes to us from far away. It is like a global product that's already traveled. And so I think sometimes when we try too hard to be local minded, it can actually like keep us from experiencing great things that are happening other places. And so alongside, you know, a lot of other things that were going on in the country at the time, it felt like everyone was like trying to close in. And I realized one of the things that's most important to me is learning from places that aren't local to me and trying to like bring the best of that home to share with people that I love here. And so Yonder became like the best way to share the world with people who maybe don't get to travel the way that I do. And so the format for the subscription is every month we feature a roaster from a different country. And so you're trying coffee that's both grown and roasted all around the world. And so in every 12 months, you'll feature 12 different coffees from 12 different roasters in 12 different countries. Some of you guys recently got some beans from this month's feature from Melbourne, Australia. And this is a fun one also because the roaster is actually from Korea, but moved to Melbourne when he fell in love with coffee, and is now also starting another roastery in Seoul. And so it's kind of I think just even this month is a great picture of how international coffee can be. Next month, we have a roaster from Switzerland. Actually, after that, we'll be featuring South Korea. We recently had Denmark and South Africa. So it's really like a very wide focused subscription, which I find really helpful because kind of, and I'm not sure where everybody who's on here with us, like kind of what your experience with coffee is, but I think a lot of times we experience specialty coffee and don't realize that we're tasting like one expression of what specialty can be. And so like a lot of you guys live in Philly, there are some really fantastic roasters in Philly. But I think if your only experience with specialty coffee was Philly roasters, you'd be missing a lot of the potential expressions of specialty coffee out there. And so I had a similar experience growing up in North Carolina. Counterculture is a really big roaster that's based here. And Black and White is another one that's come up in the last few years. They make fantastic coffee. I fell in love with coffee in part because of the like beautiful coffees that they were producing. But also when I've, you know, I recognize this is a huge privilege that I've had, but when I tried coffee that was roasted in Berlin or coffee that was roasted in Hong Kong, and then taste like how different those can be from what is made for me. Like coffee's flavor comes in part from where it's grown, but it also comes from how it's roasted. And so in a large part, what's made for the people where I live is like catered to our taste. And so the things that we experience in it also are made for us. And I talked with an example of this, I think, is I talked with a farmer in Colombia who had an entire lot of coffee that he had set aside just to send to people on the West Coast of the US because it was a varietal that he's like, people from California love this coffee. And I have this other lot that's specifically for people in Singapore and Hong Kong because it, like the way I'm growing it, like specifically caters to the taste preferences that they love. And so for me, that was really exciting and like kind of strange to hear because it's the element of the industry that you don't really experience without kind of getting out of your bubble. And so, yeah, so Yonder is sort of an exciting opportunity for people to widen the horizons of like the types of coffees that they get to experience. And a new project that I'll talk about a little bit later is called Kahaya Coffee. And that is a new like micro green coffee like importing project that I'm partnering with some people in Indonesia to do. And basically we're working with farmers who are doing really exciting new types of processing as a way of kind of raising quality standards of what is possible in West Java, Indonesia. So I know you guys recently had another guest speaker who talked a lot about processing. So I don't know, maybe we can chat about that a little later in the Q&A session, but there's some fun things coming up, and starting Kahaya has been a really cool entry point into a new level of the industry for me. So yeah, anyway, that's kind of where I come from and how I fit into the coffee industry. Today, we're going to talk about the journey that a coffee takes on its way to you, and then also what it looks like to run a company where we're sourcing coffee from roasters, and now running a company where I'm sourcing coffee from farmers. So when you taste a cup of coffee, and I don't know how many are sipping coffee with me now. I'm trying one from A Coffee this month in Melbourne, and I'm currently drinking the Kenyan coffee, the Gichiori, that we sent out to our 2-box subscribers. But it tastes like pomegranate, orange, and cherry, and it's super delicate, really nice. But I try to never take a coffee for granted. And kind of as Zach and I were planning this call, this came up kind of naturally. And I think everybody on the call got kind of excited as we talked about it. But like, it really is worth celebrating every time you have a cup of coffee that tastes really nice, because there are so many steps between you drinking it and that coffee plant being grown that could go wrong. I was recently at a coffee farm in Puerto Rico where they lost almost all of their plants in Hurricane Maria. And as they've started replanting, it kind of like, I knew this fact, but seeing it like in person and realizing just like the severity of it, like it kind of took a whole new level of reality for me. But when a coffee is planted, it takes 3 to 5 years before that plant will like reap a harvest. And so even before we get to picking or processing or shipping, there's like 3 years of farming that goes into a single bean getting made. And once we hit that 3-year mark, it's another like 2 or 3 years before it's really hitting like it's the plant is able to produce more than 20% of its full capacity. So a lot of times a farmer is really looking at 5 to 6 years before they're able to make a profit on a plant that they've planted. And so if weather conditions are rough, or there's a hurricane or a drought, so much can go wrong just in the planting. There's also, I don't know if you guys have talked at all about like coffee varietals, but a lot of places, basically the varietal is the mutation of coffee that is being planted. And so different parts of the world grow different beans. You've probably noticed that if you look at whole bean coffee, sometimes there's like really small, almost like pea-sized beans. This coffee is a good example of that. I'll just show you real quick. I don't know if you can, I hadn't thought this through. I don't know how we're going to do this, but nope, that's not going to work at all. Really tiny beans. A lot of the coffees that we get out of Kenya tend to be really small. especially if they're sorted for quality. But so different coffee varietals grow in different weather, to different amounts of success. And then certain varietals tend to be like hardier and able to withstand weather patterns better. Others are likely to get different kinds of diseases, be affected by different pests, or like an issue called leaf rust that can affect the plant. And so farmers have like, there's this kind of, it's a fascinating industry when you really get into it, because every year farmers are trying to figure out which plants to buy in order to harvest something that will be profitable 5 to 10 years in the future. But in a lot of places, the market dictates which kinds of coffee are able to be sold and which are able to be grown. And so there's, just at the farm level, so many things that can affect a coffee's like potential success. Then when we move past that, it's grown. Let's say all of the, it's getting enough sunlight, but it's also getting enough shade. It's getting enough water. The weather's good. Then the coffee is harvested. And if it's harvested at the wrong time, if it's either too ripe or not ripe enough, then the coffee sours. Then it moves to the processing layer. And if processing goes weird, if you're trying to, dry a natural coffee and the weather conditions too humid, or if you're trying to wash a coffee, but it doesn't effectively do it well, then a lot can go wrong. Then, so it's grown, there's issues there. It's harvested, there's lots that could go wrong there. In processing, all kinds of funky stuff can happen. Then it's shipped. So it's dried after processing to a level in which it can be shipped to whatever country is going to receive it. So let's say we have a Colombian coffee. It goes on a boat to New York, so that then a roaster in Philly can buy it from a container in New York and receive it. If anything happens on the boat, then the coffee can be affected. So there was a situation where I remember a couple years ago, there's an amazing coffee project in Burundi called Long Miles Project. And they grow really, really beautiful coffees. They work with local farmers and are doing like fantastic stuff. But everyone on the East Coast, I think this was 2019, everyone on the East Coast was had pre-bought this coffee, and then the boat that it was shipping on got lost at sea somehow, which I didn't know is like a thing that still happens. But the coffees got delayed by about 4 months, and by the time they'd arrived, they didn't taste good anymore. And so there was like a full year's harvest lost just because like a boat incident. But the roasters had already paid for it. The farmers had already paid for it. Like, it was just kind of like everybody was kind of like, well, we're out of luck for this one. And so I don't know if you guys know, let's see, I was talking with Little Amps Coffee in Harrisburg, and also Passenger in Lancaster. But they were two of the roasters that had already purchased a lot of this coffee. And they're like, we're still going to use it. We're going to find something to do with it. But most of it went into the production of instant coffee as a way to kind of mitigate losses on it. But they were just sad because it was a coffee that tasted amazing when they tried it. Every year it tastes great, but because of this issue on the boat, it, arrived in a different condition than they'd expected. So let's say then that doesn't happen. It arrives on time. It's still super fresh. Then the roaster roasts it. If they do a good job roasting, then it still tastes really good. But there's also all kinds of issues that can happen in the roasting process that affect a coffee and make it kind of weird. And then once it's roasted, you really have like a month to enjoy it before it's lost most of its flavor. So for a lot of times, by the time we get the coffee, it's already like on its way out. Like the sun's already setting on this coffee. And then whether you're getting it at a coffee shop or you're making it home, the brewer or barista, there's so many things that can happen with the way that you're brewing a coffee that can make it taste, you know, weird or flat or over extracted or, you know, whatever you have. And so for me, anytime I have, that's a very long example of whenever I try a coffee that tastes phenomenal, I like to pause and like appreciate how many things went right to create this experience that was so meaningful to me. And so for me, like enjoying a coffee that just like blows my mind is really like almost like a sacred experience. Like I think the deeper you get into the industry and the more you see all of the factors and really more than like, because it's not like a machine where there's just a bunch of cogs and they all have to spin correctly. Like it's people who are artisans and farmers and artists who are like really like honing a craft. And so when they do their job well and we get to reap the benefits of that, it's just really, I think, a special thing that we often take for granted and forget is special. And so really, if there's anything that we take away from today, it's like to remember how beautiful it is when you have a coffee that like you have to, when you pause to be like, man, that tastes so good, like to thank everybody that was a part of that. So I think I would like to maybe take a short break. I have, I guess, a couple more things I'd like to talk about. But I think before we move into that layer, if anyone has any questions or would like clarification on any points, I would love to do that before I just like plow ahead. So if anyone has any questions, I don't know how y'all want to do that, but let me know.
Maggie has a question. And if you have a question, just like speak up or put it in the chat. But yeah, we'll get to them.
So this question kind of comes from, I study like peace engineering at Drexel, and like we talk a lot about like how it's like a lot of countries send like aid to other countries, but that's not really helpful. And like one of the best things you can do is like invest in communities, like in industries around the world. And it kind of sounds like that you're doing like the same thing with like the coffee. So how do you like, what do you, I guess, like look for when in like the coffees that you choose for the subscription, or do you look for like communities like that you said, like the one in Puerto Rico that you're like, oh, I can invest in them. So even though they lost everything in the hurricane, like one day they can have their industry thriving again.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think it's interesting because there's not a single like checklist. It really looks different, like contextually wherever we are. But for me, I like first look to people who inspire me. So those people in Puerto Rico, the way they're thinking is like, it made me feel like I'm in the dark, and they're like on a whole other level. They collect all their own rainwater. So all of their coffee is processed with, like, they live fully off the grid in that they live on a solar powered farm. They are starting a roasting project, but it'll be the first fully solar powered operation, at least on the island, but I think in the Caribbean. And so as I guess like probably the main thing that I would look for across the board is some like a general sense of like, we want to act sustainably and take care of things, but then I think there's so many different like small ways that can look different. And so I want to hear what some people are like, their passion within sustainability is to take care of their neighbors. And so for some people, it's like micro loans to help create opportunities for small lot farmers. In other places, it might be like the farmers already have access to the beans that they need, but they don't have a place to like in a clean and ethical way, like process their coffees and get them to market. And in other place, it really is just more like cut and dry. Like we are like basically disrupting the way that things have happened in such a way to, take better care of people. But for me, I think I kind of see Yonder as more of a canvas than the art itself, and then like provide it to be a platform for whatever the roaster is passionate about, to kind of take the forefront. So we have like months where like there's a roaster we work with in New Zealand, that has they've started farms in 5 different countries. And so whenever we have them on, we do talk more about sourcing and what it looks like to do the community development side of intentionally making things better. And then there's a roaster called Luna in Vancouver, Canada, that we work with. And for them, it's more long-term. They're like, we want to work with fewer people, but work long-term and become like friends and family with these people. So we're going to buy their coffee every year, even if it doesn't taste as good as it did last year, because if we keep paying them more than they could get elsewhere, then we can keep building something together that grows bigger. So it's really, I'm always inspired by the people who find their thing and like really go after it. In Indonesia, for the new project that I'm working on, the thing that we were looking for was farmers who were like hungry to learn from the people. Basically, like, we want to do things better than we are, and better than we know how, and better than the people around us care to do. So like in Indonesia, the government has like a pretty equitable program for farmers. And so without doing a ton of work, they can sell a product that will make them enough money to live on. So it doesn't really push anything forward, but it also, you can kind of comfortably live as a farmer there. And so the people that we were drawn to were basically trying to get funding so that they could go to other countries to learn from farmers that were doing inspiring work. They wanted to like get their Q grade license. They wanted to continue to like push forward. And so, yeah, it really depends place to place and person to person. But I think I just want to be surrounded by it, and I want to invest in the people who like have a dream for a better world than we have now, and are actually doing something about that, and have like a real plan to get there. So I don't know if that makes sense, or if you want any clarification, but yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question kind of building off of that, but how can we as like this student organization help spread the message? I think it's like really inspirational how you're saying like with every great cup of coffee, you have to like take a second to just appreciate that. And like, what are steps we can take to help kind of remind people of like coffee's roots and everything? And like that it is more than just a drink, but a community.
That's another great question. For me, I think coffee is such a beautiful like microcosm of the world, because it's always been about bringing people together. So obviously right now we can't all be at a coffee shop together, but it still brought us together on the internet. And so I think there's so many ways where like there's probably aspects of almost every industry that are like this, but not every industry fosters bringing people together in the same way. And so I think that just makes it a little bit easier, because everybody already feels like nobody like hates, either people like hate coffee or they love it, you know? And so if you already love it, then just like reminding people to take those moments. And I think when you start to paint the picture of what goes into it, it becomes so much easier to appreciate. But I think the biggest thing is like celebrate local small business while also reminding people that it's not just a local thing. Like you can really like, you can love your local roaster so hard and like, you know, be the biggest like champion of them, while also not getting to like, not letting your blinders get too small. And even when you're there, like reminding them to help tell the story of the coffees that they are featuring. Because I think sometimes, and I don't want to like throw anybody under the bus, but I think sometimes in the industry, as the specialty coffee market wanted more specifics, like it wasn't, we got past like, I want an African coffee, and we got past even, I want an Ethiopian coffee. It's like, I want a Worka Chelbesa coffee. Like I need to know the farm, I need to know the farmer, I need to know everything about it. And I think that's really helpful. But I think it can also has led to this weird thing where sometimes the farmers become more an advertisement or like a logo for a coffee instead of a person to celebrate. And so I think sometimes if like a coffee is named after a person, like remind the roaster, like I want to know that person's story. Like I want to understand what brought them into this industry and why they're passionate about it, because hot coffee is hard work and you don't just do it because it's like the easy thing to do. And so when we have these people who are, I don't know, I think we're like one step away from it being really great, but sometimes I think we stop at this place where like we see a picture of a farmer and then use that as like sort of like, look, you know, diversity and taking care of people, but like it can also sort of dehumanize people a little bit. And so I think just trying in any way that we can to remind our community and our friends and our, you know, even coffee shops and roasters to like remember the humanity in those people and yeah, really celebrate them as industry leaders in a sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Cool.
I guess a quick follow-up to that. So do you think, I mean, I don't know how open the lines of communication are between like the roaster, like the barista, the roaster, like all the way back down to the farmer. But do you think that, like, I guess the reminding people of the humanity behind the farmers and like the people that are producing the coffee early on kind of opens or will come with like more open lines of communication? Or is that just something that the industry has to change altogether and move towards? Because I know like people like Passenger and Luna, every time I've gotten coffee from them, there's like a whole sheet on like the specific farm or the community that it's from. But then there's other roasters where it's just like, oh, here's a specific name. It tastes like berries. And then it's end of story.
So that is almost always available. It's easy for Luna because Laura like is the one directly communicating with all of those farmers. Before she started Luna, she was the green buyer for 42nd Parallel, which is a pretty incredible roaster up in Vancouver. So she had years of her whole job being talking with farmers all the time. Passenger does some direct trading, but they also import through, you know, a number of importers. I'm not sure if it's a number of importers. They do source coffee through a green buyer. But the thing is, most of those green buyers have all of that information. And so it's up to the roaster to decide if they want to share it. And so I think as consumers care more about knowing, it puts pressure on roasters to like make sure that they're representing those people well. And then they'll make sure that they get that information. Like it's all available because the lines of communication are there. Now, most roasters might not have like the farmer's WhatsApp, but like they know someone who can tell them that. And so I think it's kind of on us. Like Luna and Passenger, I think, are great examples because they've sort of decided that that's who they want to be in the industry, as someone who's like constantly illuminating quality producers. But if we all collectively care about that more and kind of ask that to be required, like roasters can find it for us, and they'll provide that for us as we ask for it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. So the two other little pieces I want to talk through are sourcing from roasters, which is what I do with Yonder, and then sourcing from farmers, which is now what I'm doing with Kahaya. So for me on the subscription, we feature 4 tiers every month. And so that's a 1 bag, a 2 bag, and then a 4 bag subscription. So at any time we're featuring 4 different coffees, but I always try to think in terms of who's getting 1 bag from us and how do we make sure that they're constantly having an experience that like stretches their imagination of what tasty coffee can be. And so in addition to featuring like a different roaster each month, we also always make sure it's from a different country, and I try to make sure that the coffee that we feature is also grown in a different country, so that we're not like I tend to really like, Ethiopian, Kenyan. I like African coffees a lot, but if I just send everyone an Ethiopian coffee every month, they would be missing out on how incredible Colombian coffees can be. Or, I've had some like pretty mind-blowing Nicaraguan coffees recently. And so I think there are subscription services that give you the chance to choose everything. And I've specifically formatted Yonder to be different so that you're more trusting us to curate a fantastic experience for you, but like you don't have any say on what is going to happen when you get it. So I like that. That's actually the kind of subscription I signed up for before I started one, because I like being surprised and I like being challenged. But so every month we feature, as we start working with the roasters, we work with them to figure out which coffees they like the most of what they're serving. And then I kind of figure out how that fits into the lineup. So I'm making sure that, in the last 3 months, have we had a coffee similar to this? And then really the biggest hurdles are like, how do we make sure that we are telling your story well? And how can we make sure that coffee can get shipped efficiently? This month, unfortunately, is a good example of what can happen. So A Coffee is like truly a fantastic roaster. But we were the first time that they've shipped to the US. And because they'd worked with DHL to ship to other parts of the world before, they assumed it would be fine. And then I guess kind of blew past me asking for a shipping quote and to make sure that we could get it on time. And shipping this month was pretty astronomical, and then also took too long, and then also got held at customs. And so something that usually takes like 2 days ended up taking 10, which was, pretty disappointing for me, but also, the way they roast, it worked out perfectly, I think, in the end. But where normally I think I would pay like $400 or $500 to get it shipped in, this month it took almost $1,000. And that was just because the roaster didn't have the same experience working with American shippers and didn't have a lot of the stuff worked on in advance. So it's funny because there's so much, like I've done this for now 2.5 years. There's like a process that we follow every month, and also every month is like starting from scratch because we're working with a different country's currency, shipping schedules, customs, all of that changes every month. So it's sort of always a new adventure. But for me, I appreciate it because it also gives me the chance to sort of like really dive into how they run their business and how we can represent them well to the people, that trust us to serve them coffee. When we source from farmers, it looks really different because instead of coffee's getting roasted and then hopefully overnighted to the US, everything's picked and then processed, and then you have to wait like 4 months before it arrives. And so a lot changes between then and like step A and step B. So coffee that we purchased last summer from Indonesia was harvested in September, loaded onto a boat in October. It arrived to Long Beach, California, January 5th. And then it just got to Chicago, and then it will come to North Carolina from there. So it's been kind of a like full opposite extremes of what, international shipping can look like. We've got a container's worth of coffee on a train right now, instead of a bunch of boxes with DHL. But it's also been interesting to kind of learn how the language changes as you work with farmers versus roasters, because you're like stepping back like 4 steps in the chain. And so with farmers, with roasters, the coffee has already arrived and like the quality is more like written in stone. Like they've tried it, they've test roasted it, they're producing it and serving it to their cafes every week. And so they can tell you a lot more of what definitively this is gonna be like. With farmers, you get early production samples, which is sort of like the first cherries that are picked, and then they can ship them so that you can get a sense of what they'll taste like. But then how that will, you're not really sure how that will taste at the end of the harvest. And then in the green state, especially between harvesting and processing, there's still just so much that's up in the air, that it really feels more like, and it makes sense. It feels more like an agricultural product than a dining ingredient. And so when I'm talking with the farmers, we're talking about tasting notes, and the tasting notes are changing every week. Whereas when you talk to the roaster, they're pretty consistent. When you're talking to the farmer, they think that the coffee could be ready next week, but it might be 2 months from now, depending on a number of factors. And so it's been a whole new adventure for me. I'm learning a lot. But I think it's been really fascinating to see how volatile the industry is and how much we rely on each other in it. But also how much, things can change in the middle. So I'll just really quickly explain what we're bringing this year from Kahaya. We're featuring 4 coffees, 2 each from 2 farms. And so we have a washed and a natural from a place called Chiwide in West Java, and then also an anaerobic washed and an anaerobic natural coffee from Chikole, also in West Java. And the exciting thing about those coffees is that most coffee grown in Indonesia is processed using a wet hull process. So you guys recently, I don't know how many were on that call, but you probably talked about washed and natural coffees, right? Well, in Indonesia, because rainfall is almost every day, it's pretty difficult to effectively use wash or natural processing because of the moisture in the air and the constant rainfall. And so most coffees are processed with a wet hull process, in which the coffee is left in the skin and the moisture level is around double what most coffee beans would be dry. So they can taste really nice, but they also rot really quickly. And so coffees are processed in like a couple days, pushed out, moved on, and then usually they go bad pretty quickly, but they can get kind of sorted into like a Folgers mix without anyone really noticing pretty quickly. So these kind of like this new group of farmers in West Java are experimenting with more traditional processing formats like washed and natural, but doing so in a way that can work with their climate. And as a result, they're like growing some of what to me is the most fantastic coffee that I've ever tasted from Southeast Asia. So I'm really excited at the potential. I think because people have, usually when people think of Java or Sumatran coffees, it's pretty dark roasted Starbucks blends, which, you know, if that's your thing, that's great. But I think the way that we taste those coffees isn't a reflection of the capacity that's there. And so I'm really excited, hopefully within the next week or so, to get our first real production samples to see what we'll be able to sell. But the coffees that I was trying taste like Earl Grey tea and like dried pineapple and papaya, and then like a lot of really cool, like almost like bubble gum kind of sweetness. And so just stuff that I wouldn't have expected from Indonesian coffees, and then and really even some flavors that I've not really ever found in other places. And so I don't really get to take any credit for it. Basically, my role is helping sell it to roasters here in the States. But it's, yeah, a pretty exciting new development, I think, for that part of the world and for roasters here to experience something that they didn't know could taste like that from a place like that. So, yeah. I'm going to do another pause for questions, I think.
Sweet. Yeah, feel free to throw them in the chat or just speak up. But that's funny. I just put it in the chat. Tailor Made had a cool Indonesian coffee probably about a year ago, and they described it as just tasting like purple. And it was pretty accurate. It was just grapey and blackberry, but
Yeah,
it was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if they sent me that one as a sample. But yeah, Taylor is awesome and uses a lot of colors as tasting notes, which I'm definitely all about. So they're an awesome roastery as well.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So how far do you plan ahead for each roaster? Is it like you plan the year out, like, or do each month, like you reach out to somebody? Like, how does that work?
I used to plan a year out, and then COVID sort of changed everything. I'm currently planned about 3 months ahead at a time. I'm trying to build that back out a little bit further. But there was a while where like regulations changed so fast that roasters were like, we're ready for next month. And then they went to send me samples and found out they weren't allowed to ship to the US because the cases here were so high that their government deemed it dangerous to mail us coffee, which is a bleak thought. But so a lot's changed. I would usually be about 6 to 8 months in advance. So I'd usually, around this time of year, plan out the whole year. But currently we're kind of working with like, I know it's going to happen 3 months from now, and that's kind of like a rotating change. So yeah. And kind of the way I approach that is I try to bounce back and forth between some country in Europe and some other part of the world pretty regularly because there's a whole lot of really great European roasters. And they're all, you know, a couple hours away from each other, but doing really different things. But then I don't want it to be just a European coffee subscription. And so we try to mix it up with like, we'll go to South Africa and then back to Europe, and then Singapore, and then back to Europe, and then Colombia, and then back to Europe. So it's easier to build out because the infrastructure in the EU allows for pretty fast and easy shipping to the States. But it's usually the countries in the middle that create more of the adventure. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess this is just like a unrelated but kind of related question. So what country other than the US like has your favorite roasters? Is there like one country in specific that like has like just a ton of like great roasters that no one really like talks about ever, or is it just up to whoever?
It's a great question. I don't think it's like a secret, but Australia has great roasters. Japan has really great roasters. I think probably like biggest collection of roasters I love really deeply is Norway. But they're also those are all places that are pretty famous for having great coffee. I think the interesting thing in each of those is that coffee culture runs really deep there. And so there's a lot of appreciation for good coffee, but it's also interesting because I think those aren't easy places for new coffee to happen. Just because the people that are doing really well there own such a big part of the market that like TaylorMade's a great example. Like Norway's not a very big country. They already have like such a huge number of fantastic roasters that what Taylor did there when she did it the first time was pretty amazing. And then when she had to start it a second time, yeah, I was pretty blown away. So I think yeah, probably those three. But more than a single country where I love a lot of roasters, I'm always more excited about like finding a fantastic roaster from somewhere that isn't famous for having good coffee. And then yeah, I think probably like I'm most inspired by the people who, and this kind of goes back to a different question, like what do I look for when I'm featuring someone, but like I want to find the people who are helping carve out a specialty enjoying market. So there's a roaster we're going to be working with soon from Colombia. Colombia grows some of the most coffee in the world. And yet most Colombian people don't ever really get a chance to drink Colombian coffee. Or if they do, it's probably not the really quality specialty stuff. And so there's a fantastic roastery called Libertario that exports insanely good coffees. If you've heard of La Palma y el Tucán, it's a part of that growing project, but they save some of their best coffee. Instead of exporting it, they save it to share with their community. And I think that's like a whole different topic that I could go in for probably an hour or so. But if we want to address, like if we want a more like equal future for coffee where farmers are paid well and people get to make a living wage off of coffee production, it's going to cost more for people who don't live in growing countries, because the countries that will grow coffee will also be coffee enjoying countries. So places in Honduras and Colombia and Indonesia and Thailand that are not only helping farmers grow better coffee, but are also roasting and serving fantastic coffees like to their community, are the people that probably inspire me the most. So yeah, we're gonna work with this roaster in Colombia soon. They're like my heroes. And then there's a roaster in Bangkok that we were supposed to feature right before lockdown, and we haven't gotten to do that yet because of a couple of things in the States and then a couple of things in Thailand. But they're serving like mind-blowingly good Thai coffees. And I don't think anybody knew that like Thai coffee isn't something that people like if you think of Thai coffee, it's like condensed milk and coffee. It's not beans that were grown there. But what these guys are doing is like so phenomenal that I think it has the potential to rock a lot of roasters world, because coffee from Thailand is actually doing very, very well, but almost none of it is exported from Thailand because so many people in Thailand drink it. And so to me, that feels like the actual sustainability model that that would allow for, you know, an ever-changing world to like continue to take care of producers, is for like a community to love the products that they grow enough that they're the ones who are fighting for like better pay for the workers in that country, and then people like us who live outside of the place where it comes from then having to react and pay more for that quality product, instead of us determining the rates that we can sell and buy at, and those people having to just like react and hope that they don't lose their shirt in the process. So I don't know. That's my little soapbox on that front.
Thank you.
That's really
I have
exciting.
a quick question. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like right before this talk, I was literally talking with my sister about like the Thai coffee and how like the beans there are really good. Because when we were there, so Maggie, Jill, and I, when we were there, like I went to some of the roasters and got some of the beans, and they were like really good. Because my sister was like, "Oh yeah, well the condensed milk coffee is really good." I was like, "No, like the beans are good too." So
That's awesome. Yeah, it's true. There's like kind of like surprisingly amazing stuff happening there.
I was just wondering, well, first, thank you everybody for letting me be part of this this talk. I found it fascinating, and thank you. But we recently, well, a couple of years ago, been to Brazil, and I know they're big coffee growers, and their beans are not known, either their beans or their process is not known for making really good coffee. But have you found any small roasters or growers there that have a niche or?
Yeah. One moment, I'm gonna look up the name of it. So the thing is, Brazil, I think similarly to Colombia, has the weather, like the climate, to produce fantastic coffee. The only thing is that a lot of the market is set up, and it really goes back to like colonial times. But so much of what we think of as like the international trading industry was initially set up to bring like sugar, tea, coffee, rum, spices from tropical climates to Europe, and then also to the States. And so I think way before, I mean, generations ago, when coffee was grown in Brazil and most of Central and South America, it was then grown to maximize the quantities of beans that could be grown so that it could be then shipped back out. And so Brazil, I think, has the potential to do really, really phenomenal stuff, but so much of the industry is still based on a profitability structure that puts quantity over quality. And so instead of high quality beans, most of the coffees that we have that come from there are because farmers there understand that it would be a big risk to grow less coffee, because really for a coffee to taste great, it has to come from a lower yield plant. And so if you want to grow a whole lot of coffee, grow it in full sun and pick it really fast. If you want coffee to taste as good as it could be, it has to be grown in the shade where it'll produce less fruit, and those cherries will stay on the plant longer and like keep getting just like packed with all of the sugars and nutrients. And so there are really great Brazilian producers. It's just such a different business model than I think it'd be almost like telling a corn farmer in Iowa that if they want to grow like really good corn, they need to grow like a third of what they were planning to grow and then change everything about the way that they were doing it. And so it's just because I think the two highest producing countries in the world are Brazil and Colombia. And so much of like commodity level, like your Folgers and Maxwell House and whatever other grocery store, hotel, coffee blends, there are like really rely on coffee from Brazil. There's not been as much interest from the place of farmers of like switching everything up. Like it's kind of like a, if it's not broken, don't fix it idea. But I'm going to share with you in the chat just one. There are more, but these are who comes to mind right away. There's a farm and processing center, and they also work with other farmers to help export coffee, but it's called Deterra. And they grow some of the like some of the most beautiful coffees I've ever had. And they're in Brazil, and yeah, helping try to shift the model there to be more sustainable and yeah, produce higher end coffee. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions?
Has anyone who got or who won the competition to get coffees? Cool. How many of them have arrived so far? Okay. Well, please like email me or DM me on Instagram as you taste them. I'd love to hear what you think. It's been really nice to chat with you guys, and I was glad to get to send some coffee your way. So
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It was a good one. If you haven't gotten it yet and haven't tasted it yet, it's like
Yeah, it was really
it's a good
yummy.
one. And yeah, it's from Guji in Ethiopia, which is a pretty cool region as well. So yeah, cool. Well, if we don't have any more questions, thank you to Caleb for this awesome talk. And if you have any other questions that come up after this, feel free to email us or reach out to Caleb. I think we've tagged Yonder a few times on our Instagram, so be sure to give them a follow and make sure to subscribe because they do a lot of cool things. So yeah, thank you.
thank you guys.
Thanks, Caleb.
Have a
Thank
good-
you.
Thank you.
Caleb, I had another question. I would have asked earlier, but I didn't realize you were done. Can you talk about specifically how you determine who you're going to source from as far as roasters? Like, how do you find them? Do you know them already and have you tried their coffees already? Or do you like research them and then reach out and be like,
Yeah.
please send me a sample or something?
Yeah. So our first 2 years were all roasters that I had gotten the chance to visit and really, loved and appreciated what they were doing. I do try to, like, I'll never share coffee that I haven't tasted myself, just because that feels like too risky, I guess. But so it started as a way to share roasters that I already loved, bring it home to the people that I love. As we started to run out of those, it was like, well, this is an exciting new problem. So I kind of had to shift. We still feature some of those every now and then, but a lot have been roasters that have found us and reached out wanting to be featured. And then sometimes it's me reaching out to them, but either way, yeah, we have them ship samples. I kind of evaluate, like, get a sense of, obviously these might not be the coffees that we're going to feature because they'll change so frequently, but get a sense of like your roasting style, what kind of experience are you trying to provide people, that kind of thing. And then I'll try to jump on a Zoom or an Instagram video or something and chat through, like, tell me more about like what makes you guys tick, like what are you passionate about. When we share you with our people, what do you want their takeaway to be? And then if everything feels good, I kind of add them into the lineup where it makes sense in the world. So.
And you talked about sourcing directly from the farmers. When you do that, are they roasting their own coffee and sending it to you, or is it green coffee?
We've received samples both ways. I prefer to get green coffee from them, just because the infrastructure for getting coffee from the farm to the States a lot of times just takes a lot longer than, like, most roasters are set up in a city where UPS or DHL can pick it up that day and 4 days later it's to me. But coffee coming from a farm in Honduras or Indonesia has a lot of times taken a couple weeks. And so when possible, I'd rather them send it green if they can get the license to do so. Roasted coffee isn't treated as an agricultural product, it's a food product. So it gets through customs easier. But if it gets held at customs, by the time it's roasted, I might not be tasting it at its best. But so I have a sample roaster that I'll use. So I try to have them send me, green coffee when possible, or at least like what they, if not the recipe that they use for roasting, then kind of like what they taste when they roast it, and then let me create my own profile for that.
Yeah, right on. Do you have that Ikena thing or whatever I've seen on Instagram that's like the little sample thing?
Yeah, the Akawa.
Oh,
it's very
that's
cool.
Pretty cool. Very cool.
It'd be fun back when the world's normal. Next time I'm up in Pennsylvania or something, we could do like a sample roasting class or something. So
that'd be sweet.
That's
Bring
less
the
cool over
EK43 too.
Yeah.
So Zach and I can play.
Yeah.
Oh man.
It's here and it's having fun. One day I will have a coffee shop and then it won't just be in my room, but for now.
Right on.
Yeah.
Pretty cool appliance for your room though.
It is. I mean, no complaints. I just wish that, I don't know. I wish it could like stretch its wings and fly, it feels a little cramped in here. So
yeah. Cool. I had a question about you talked about Burundi a little bit.
Yeah.
So I remember a few years ago, I think it was Madcap that posted it, because I feel like they have like a pretty open like education thing on Instagram. But they talked about like the potato defect is it Burundian coffees or Malawi coffees? Is that related to that the shipping thing, or is that just like a whole nother entity? Is it like an insect or a disease?
That's a great question. I think I would probably actually trust your answer more than mine. But as I understand it, it's a similar problem to like leaf rust, where it's like some kind of an environmental pest that can really affect production. The issue that the issue from a couple years ago was that for whatever reason, I think it was like storms that blew it off course, but just like the boat got stuck for too long. But that is an issue that really affects Burundian coffees. And I want to say Rwandan, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, I mean, really like depending on, Burundi's a really fascinating place because they have I think some of the most untapped potential for like quality coffee in Africa. But because it's one of the poorest countries in the world, and coffee aside, there aren't really many other exports, or like it feels like they're kind of stuck unless some things change. And so the producers that are working there are yeah. I mean, I would recommend following. I'll find their website and share it real quick, but
yeah, because I do feel like every coffee I've had from there, not many, but a few, have been like phenomenal.
Yeah.
I just feel like they're harder to find. I know Machina has one right now that I've heard is pretty good, but
cool.
I was just wondering if that was like related, because I remember seeing that post back, I guess it would probably been around 2019 at that point. So I wasn't sure if that was related at all.
It probably affected, the thing is, it would have affected the coffee long before it was on the boat.
Yeah.
If it affected the same lots, then it meant that those lots ended up being a lot smaller because a lot had to get sorted out. But yeah, that's where like some of the really exciting potentials come with like hybridized varietals and stuff, because if you can grow coffees that are resistant to environmental changes, then you have the potential to like maintain quality while also making a more like hardy, like enduring plant. So I don't know. I mean, this is like sort of unrelated, but just like weird tip, watch out for it in the next few years. Watch how Kenyan coffees change. Because traditionally in the last like 10-15 years, the coffees that are grown from Kenya use a varietal called SL 34, and I'm blanking, another SL.
I think.
Is it 28?
Yes, exactly. But then those are having a harder and harder time surviving and like producing well in between changing climates and just all the environmental changes that come alongside that. And so in the last couple of years, they're adding a lot of a new varietal called Batian, new to Kenya, and then also another varietal called Ruiru 11. And those are helping Kenyan coffees like produce more consistent qualities, but it's also meaning that the coffees taste different than they did a couple years ago. So I'm already noticing that like about half of the coffees coming out of Kenya have a different profile than they did a couple years ago, which I'm just sort of like observing. I don't know if it's like sometimes I feel like it's sad because I miss how Kenyans tasted in like 2012. But also I think it's kind of it's just kind of beautiful to watch things adapt, like despite things that feel like really bad. And like, I mean, obviously climate change is a huge problem, and the coffee industry, I think, is doing a pretty good job of trying to address it. But it's also fascinating to watch places that 15 years ago couldn't have produced coffee. With changing climates now, they're beginning to be able to. And so there's this level at which like change is inevitable to the farmers because of the choices of governments and people around the world. And so the way that they're adapting means that they can't hold on to the things that happened in a specific way a few years ago. And I think like Burundi is a great example of that. They're also now able to do new things, and the way they're adapting is like, I guess it's just like, it is what it is in a sense, but it's fascinating if you watch it carefully to see as it happens, what they do with it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a talk last year for the coffee expo when it was online, and they were talking a lot about the changes that are going to be coming, especially with like climate change affecting leaf rust and everything, and just how farmers are reacting or preparing to react more more efficiently against like, impacts of climate change. So
it's fascinating, and it's admirable, and it's sad, and it's exciting all at the same time. Like exciting in that as they adapt, it's also like creating new potentials that weren't there before. So yeah, fascinating to watch, and it'll be interesting to see what coffee tastes like in 10 years, like as things keep changing. So yeah, any other thoughts, questions, what things you want to clarify?
Not for me. I don't know if anyone else has anything.
Like really quick last thing.
Yeah, no, I'm good to keep going. So
this is my first like Zoom meeting with Drexel Coffee Club, and I'm glad there's less people here now because I am so embarrassed to admit like I know nothing, and hearing you talk about this is so interesting, but like I still don't feel like I know enough to like really appreciate it. So like how would I go about getting educated on like this kind of stuff? Like because I want to. It seems really cool.
yeah. Well, I'll just speak for me, and then I think probably someone else who's in the club would be a great resource after that. But I don't think there's like, we all start where you are. Like I just went to coffee shops a lot because I got work done better there than at home. And eventually that turned into like, I love being at coffee shops. And eventually that turned into, I want to understand why some coffee shops are good and some are less good. And it really is like a rabbit hole. So like wherever you find a place to enter, I say go for it. There are a lot of really good resources, like there's, I mean, coffee Twitter and coffee Instagram are kind of like, there's a wide range of people who talk about different subjects. But I think as much as you can, like, it is really helpful to support local roasters and cafes, and the people there like really love to share what they're learning. And so whether it's just like ordering a coffee and asking the barista, you know, what's your favorite and why, or like, why is this one tasting the way it does? I think it's an industry that loves to geek out with you and like is always learning more, and people are really excited anytime that someone wants to do that. And so I think your local cafe is a great entry point. And then the internet has a lot of really nice, fun, welcoming people who would be happy to answer questions and stuff. So
to add to that a little bit, I think, I'm not sure if it's Sprudge, but I think Sprudge, which is like a coffee website, I think they have guides to like for coffee in cities around the country. And I'm pretty sure there's a Philly one. If it's not Sprudge, it's another like blog post thing that I can definitely send around because it's really cool. And I remember back when I got into coffee my freshman year, that's like I relied heavily on the internet just because I didn't know anyone that was like into specialty coffee. So it's definitely, yeah, like Caleb said, just going to the shops and also like exploring online. I mean, I think that's how I found Yonder. I think I just like saw it on my explore page and here we are. But yeah.
Yeah.
Are you in Philly right now, Ashley?
No, I'm in New York.
Okay. I was gonna say if you're in Philly, we have a list of a bunch of like local roasters within like walking distance of Drexel that we can send, but I can still send it as well.
Thank you guys.
Which, which part of New York are you in?
I'm in Albany, but
Okay.
I'm in Staten Island a lot, and my uncle has a roasters there or whatever. So I
Cool.
like a little bit into it, but not really.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what good
Gotcha, that's
roasters are.
Albany.
Yeah.
They're in Troy. And I
Yeah,
know
there's
it's also sold in-
not a lot of coffee shops around here. Like, there's kind of nothing.
How far is Troy from Albany?
Troy's only like 30 minutes. It's not that bad.
Tasty or touchy coffee
They're
there
really
is
good.
really great. And is there a gimme coffee near you?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
We have again, the shops around here are kind of weird. Like, there's not a lot of anything that I could think of that would actually, like, if I asked a barista, it's probably somebody younger than me, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, next time you're visiting Staten Island, there's a lot of good stuff around the city, and yeah, hit me up on Instagram and I can send you a list of some places I love, but especially in New York City. But I think other parts of upstate have some like really quality roasters as well. So I'm happy to point you anywhere good I can.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today.
Of course.
I have to get going soon. My parents decided to come to visit today. So, I mean, I'm going to log off. I won't end the meeting in case you guys want to keep chatting, but I got to head out because my parents are going to be here in like 5 minutes.
Cool. Good to see you.
Nice seeing you. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, of course.
Have a good one, everyone.